Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're uncovering the HBO BBC historical drama series Rome, created by John Milius, William McDonald, and Bruno Heller, and starring a whole lot of people that we're going to get into. But before we kind of get into show proper and our reactions and dig it, we're just kind of launching off the first episode of this new season with, I don't know if you two have been getting harassing texts and emails from your family about the latest pop culture trend, particularly directed towards men, but about how much you think about here's my question for you, actually. How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Literally every day, Colin.
Yeah, no, I was a little upset. I'm like, but why are we asking only men that? Like,
I feel attacked.
I asked Andy, so for fairness, it's like, Andy, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? He's like, never until you start talking about it.
Did you ask Nick, Eli?
I did, and he's like, what? I guess sometimes.
Okay. I mean, this is kind of, to my mind, the spiritual successor of the, like, men will literally learn everything about the Roman Empire instead of going to therapy, like
yes.
that joke.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which there is.
Sure, yeah, there's some.
Well, and it's like my follow-up question to this is like, what about the Roman, like,
this is the part, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we unpack in the show all the time, right? It's like Rome is talked about as like this idealized place that's also a city that's like people, but people of all sorts of different cultural groups and everything. So it's like, are you just thinking about the buildings? Like,
I think it's the kind of men who think about like conquering Gaul, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of idea of Rome, of like, you know, someone going, right, Awe Kaiser, and like marching in your little legionary outfit and you know,
out to do some genocide.
Right. Yeah. Right. You know, gotta, you know, restore the Roman Empire, those kinds of memes and jokes.
Yeah. Or Stoicism. That's the big one. Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, that's always a big one. Yeah.
Where, you know, my kind of like defense was like, well, I mean, I think about like Greek poetry writing under the Roman Empire, right? You know, which is the kind of like, I don't know, not like other girls answer, I guess. But.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely it is. No, my students I'm teaching like a cultural studies course, and we're doing a unit on basically classical reception because I got to write the class. And so I decided we're doing a unit on classical reception, and they had to watch 300 this week. And so we've kind of been talking about just Western civilization and how it's this weird amorphous concept that doesn't actually have a definition. And I feel like so much of that, they brought up the whole, how many times a day do you think about the Roman Empire? And I was so proud of my little baby students making connections. Like, good for you guys.
Yeah. The question is like, when I think about it, it's like, it's like, I am an archaeologist who digs in what was a Roman province and all of that. But it's like, I'm so focused on one site and like, kind of one household that it's like, yeah, there's all this stuff going on in the city, which we're going to talk about in the show, but how much of that is really impacting the lives of people like outside of Rome, and who, you know, it's gossip, but otherwise who cares?
All this to say is this is just my desperate plea to people in my life to stop dunking on me with this stuff.
Although, okay, to be fair, we decided on our theme for this season long before this became the discourse. Happening.
I mean, so, right, like for context, as we talked about in our promo, our theme for this first season is Rome and the small screen, right? But before even we get back into that, also just a reminder is, so we're recording this on a Wednesday. Tomorrow morning, our promo episode should drop. So we're sort of a little bit out of time, but accompanying our promo episode is our sort of contest. Mm-hmm. While we're talking about sort of Rome on TV, we're also trying to get to the bottom of what is the best movie about Rome. So we talked about it in the promo, but just as a reminder, right, of what we're all. So we don't have any results yet. Next week, sort of when we return for part 2, we'll have a sense. Because I think I've voted, but there's probably only 3 votes right now.
Oh, I haven't even voted yet.
I haven't even voted yet.
Mm-hmm. Colin has the poll link. I do have the poll set up, but it hasn't posted yet.
Yeah. So right now, who's up first, right, in our bracket?
So we have the fall of the Roman Empire versus Pompeii. And then
Mhm.
we'll have the eagle versus the gladiator. And I can't remember if we
The
talked
gladiator.
the gladiator. All of them? No. Okay, I added the. But it's like all of these start with a the for the most part.
So I think we kind of know. I mean, I'm very confident with the way that first round's going to play out, but I don't know if
Yeah.
you have any other predictions you want to throw in the mix.
To be fair, I don't know how many people have seen the fall of the Roman Empire
That's
versus,
true.
I mean, people know
Yeah.
Kit Harington. There's like, well, he's pretty. I don't know.
I wonder, even just on like first impressions alone,
Yeah.
Mhm.
if like someone who has seen neither movie would look at like, okay, a 1964 film starring Alec Guinness and Sophia Loren versus, I at least maybe remember Pompeii, and like, would that?
Right.
I mean, I would argue that Fall of the Roman Empire is a superior film.
Well, I was
Yeah.
going to say, I wonder if it would go the other way. If you're looking
Mhm.
at like, oh, Alec Guinness, oh, Sophia Loren, oh, classic, old school, sword and sandal, obviously way better than Pompeii.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's my point exactly, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it is a much better film, but it's not as good as maybe it seems on paper.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and if you can't recall either one, or you want some very strong opinions about those movies from people who have seen them, you should listen to
And the
our
partial
previous
historians.
podcast.
Yeah.
And the partial historians. Yeah. Like
Mhm.
we got some legit people talking about this.
Much more successful podcasters than us.
Yeah, we're getting there.
And then
Just
round
all around
and
delightful
round two,
Oh God, it's Gladiator.
It has to be Gladiator.
I love Channing Tatum, but like it's Gladiator.
for our general predictions, right? Because we kind of bet amongst ourselves. #wine on the line.
Mm-hmm.
We bet a bottle of wine amongst ourselves, sort of who's going to take the cake. But we agreed, all of us, that we all probably think Gladiator is going to take the final podium, but we can't bet on that. So I think my horse in the race, pun intended, is Ben-Hur. Charlton Heston Ben-Hur, not the 2016 one.
I'm doing Life of Brian, Monty Python. I'm trying to hit it with humor.
Yep,
I might, that one, the more I think about it, you might have put the needle on it, right?
It's a sweet spot right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, and I'm going Spartacus. I'm going for the old school, like subconscious, I guess.
Yeah.
Thoughts
I
about the
mean,
Roman Empire. You think about
I Am
Spartacus.
Spartacus is like
Staying
redone
power.
in so many media, so much media.
Even just the question, right? Best film is kind of a whole, like, how are people interpreting it? Like, favorite film, one we think is sort of, if you can create an objective measurement of art, right, that would fit that. The one that was most successful commercially or critically. I think there's a lot of ways to sort of go at the question, which I will not. I will not tell people how to do.
Do you guys want to hear what the rounds after that will be? Since once this comes out, this is probably the one that will be in voting. So after that, both of your horses have their first challenge. So we will have Horrible Histories, The Rotten Romans,
which is my pick for worst.
Yeah, versus Spartacus.
Well, obviously Spartacus is going to win.
Probably an easy win there.
I want to say, I hope Spartacus impales that one to the wall with a trident.
Yep.
And then, Colin, you might have a little bit of a tougher one. We'll see. It'll be a good test of like serious versus funny, because it's Ben-Hur versus a funny thing happened on the way to the forum.
Ooh, that is actually a tough round. I could see Ben-Hur getting knocked out early, but who's to say?
Yeah, that one will be interesting. I think.
A funny thing happened is also very polarizing in that it is also a musical, and I feel like that that cuts out a lot of people who are just like, nope, not for me.
Yeah, fair.
Yep. Versus mine will be after that. So my Life of Brian is going to go up against the animated Cleopatra, which.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that is as interesting as that movie is, and as much as I would encourage everybody to watch it. Yeah, it languishes a little bit in obscurity.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's free to watch. Go check it out, guys. And like our discussion with Kiara was so good. Like that was a really fun discussion.
Who will be coming back?
Yeah, I'm really excited to have another conversation about Eastern receptions of the Roman world.
100%. Oh my god.
Yeah. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because as we're hitting the 11-minute mark, we should probably start talking about the episode in question. So our first thing on the docket is we are talking about HBO's Rome, which we decided we're going to split into 3 parts. So today, just focusing on the first half of season 1, episodes 1 through 6-ish. So I'll start it off, right? And although I'm sure we'll talk about sort of the series beyond these episodes. But first half of season 1, do you dig it? Right? Do you dig HBO's Rome?
So much.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. As we were talking about earlier, it's one I'd always heard of, but I'd never thought to watch it until Ray Stevenson's death earlier this year. I think Colin, you said it was in May.
Yeah.
And I recognized him from King Arthur, which is actually one of my favorite movies about Rome. Well, in the border of Rome, I guess, more accurately to say.
Rome adjacent.
Yeah. It's close. Yeah. But so I was really, sad to see he passed away. And I really liked his character in King Arthur. I was like, okay, I'm going to start watching some episodes. I'm like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Why have I not watched this before? And then I crammed like 4 episodes in last night. Some were rewatches, but it's like, I need the full experience.
Totally.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm so surprised, Christy. I don't think I knew that you hadn't watched Rome until this year.
I just assumed everybody with a PhD in our field had seen it. Right?
Yeah, you guys gotta remember, I was more of a Greek freak. Like,
True.
Rome just kind of happened accidentally.
That's true.
Much like the real city.
Yep, very true, very true.
No, I very vividly remember the first time that I saw this. I think I was either a senior in high school or a freshman undergrad. And the man who is now my husband let me borrow his DVD box set of the
So he does think about the Roman Empire.
And I remember watching it in my dorm room at the University of Iowa. And then like the next semester I took an ancient history class. So I feel like this had such a huge impact on me as like a small little baby academic. And I feel like for so many of the colleagues of my generation, I guess Colin, you as well, probably this was like a big part of just the media that was out there about the stuff that we liked.
I mean, yeah, I wanted to kind of just think about this show and kind of the landscape of TV history, but I think I saw it at some point in high school, because I don't think I was driving at the time, because I like vaguely remember, and this all might be fever dreams, truly, but I vaguely remember like my dad basically taking me to the public library and where you could rent DVD box sets of shows, and I like was exploring various, I got like a DVD box set of the first season of Seinfeld or something like that. I was like, you could just get this for free and watch it whenever. And HBO's Rome was like, because I at the time was kind of, I was interested in I was like taking Latin in high school. I was interested in history in Rome. And then the show was like coming out, but also was one of the more like adult shows, one of the first adult shows that I was sort of watching.
A lot of nakedness happening.
Yes, very. Yeah, I want to talk about that later and kind of this era of HBO and the
full frontal nudity.
Yeah, those, the mature rating elements of this season, because I remember that like very upfront. I think I watched it like with my parents.
Oh, I remember waiting for my parents to go to bed to put this on, because I was like, hell no, I'm not watching this with them.
See, there are some perks to seeing it later in life.
Yeah. And I mean, just like even at the time, right, the idea that there would be a TV show that's so edgy, for lack of a better word, was a more novel thing to me.
Yeah.
And well, I think we'll probably get into this in sort of like our overall, thoughts on the series, but like Rome walked so Game of Thrones could run.
Yeah,
like there's so much of a path being laid for like big, dark, gritty, huge, like budget, historical-esque.
It was the biggest budget TV show, I think. It had the biggest set of the time, like at that time of filming, and would only be eclipsed in those things by Game of Thrones, of which Game of Thrones, the Venn diagram of cast members between this show and, I mean, it's all just like you watch enough British television with British actors and you see a lot of the same faces. But
the guy who plays Brutus, his face was bothering me for the longest time. It's like,
Tobias McKenzie.
Outlander. Yep. Lige knows.
I know.
I know
evil of characters. I'm like, you would be Brutus, wouldn't you?
See, I knew him as Brutus going into Outlander, and I was like, ew, gross. I already hate you.
What's his name? Is it Edmund Tully? He's in Game of Thrones too. He's one of the Tullys.
Yep. Also a bitchy ass character in Game of Thrones.
Yeah. So before we kind of get into kind of our general. Oh, and for the record, I do also. I was afraid I wasn't going to dig this show coming back to it, right? Because I was afraid, it was the kind of show that wouldn't have aged as well. And actually, I think it more or less holds up.
Mm-hmm.
Its idea, what it was trying to do, I think, with the genre and was on the right track. But trying a new thing this season, right, where basically before we kind of get into the meat, we should describe the bones.
Yeah.
I should make this into a sacrifice analogy, right? We've got the meat for the gods and the meat for the participants and the bones for the gods. But anyways,
I was going to say, it's like, no wonder they think archaeologists are cursed, because we talk about weird stuff all the time.
But the sort of our challenge to listeners who maybe haven't seen or haven't seen in a while, your kind of TLDW.
Too long, didn't watch.
Yeah, of the first 6 seasons, if only. First 6 episodes.
I kind of wish there were 6 seasons of this now.
It was planned to be 5. We could have gotten 6 seasons in a movie.
Damn it.
But yeah, I don't know. Christy, I think you had a contender.
I do. It even rhymes. I'm so proud of myself. All right, so for the first 6 episodes, this is how I'd summarize it. Varanus and Pulo's shenanigans lead to Roman Republic branigans, which apparently means a noisy quarrel. I can't say quarrel, apparently, or fight or brawl. So I'm like, yes, it works.
That tracks.
Yeah.
I think mine is kind of similar in sort of so like politicians make world-ending decisions, poor people survive them.
That's really good, actually.
Yeah, mine is rich people, poor people, and dumb luck destroy a system of government.
There we go.
That's a good summary.
Yeah. But basically, yeah, so to kind of put a historical dates on the show, the first season of Rome is basically covering kind of the rise of Julius Caesar from his conflict with the Roman Senate that leads up to the Civil War, leading up to Julius Caesar becoming dictator. We'll talk about sort of how successful that was probably in the next bit. But yeah, so these first 6 episodes, anything we can go through kind of the plot?
Well, I was just going to say, it's like, the other reason I'm kind of glad I saw this later, especially after I taught a Roman Civ course and got a chance to really get in depth with the history of this period and all the politics. And so it's like, I understand the references to Sulla and things like that. What I loved about this is that you really are focused on the 2 characters of Varanus and Pulo, who are nobodies, absolute nobodies. Like, you won't find their names in the history books. Well, okay, you can correct me in a moment, but like off the top of my head, not familiar to me at all. But all of these like big names we do know from history, and you just see how these random little events, which, you know, is interesting to think about, of like, there's so many no names in history that still had an impact on the events we do know about. So the fact that Pulo got into a bar brawl the night before over loaded dice, and then when they're trying to take Mark Antony up into the Senate, and the one guy's like, hey, that asshole killed my friend, I'm gonna attack him, and like all hell breaks loose as a result. And I loved that these small like events that have nothing to do with the famous names, you know, still had a very huge impact on those big things we do know about. So that's what I really like about this show.
For sure. Yeah. I would say that's like a good beginning to an overview of just the plot in general. So I feel like we follow like those big names, those things that you would know from any big history class. So like Caesar's, you know, getting into it with Pompey after his daughter, Pompey's wife, dies in childbirth, and it's like creates this big rift between these 2 friends, and the rest of the season 1 really is a fallout of their friendship and political friendship just kind of destroying itself. But at the same time that we follow these big names, there's Cicero, there's Brutus, there's anybody that you might think of, Cato, who's one of my absolute favorites. But then there are the grunts. There's like the normal everyday people who have to, one, like deal with the situations that are created by their commanders' like petty squabbles and try to survive them in their own everyday life. I think about like Niobe, Varanus's wife, just like trying to exist and be a human and like take care of her family, and all is going on in Rome. And yeah, I think that's such a great juxtaposition to follow like these big names and then also have the fallout around them.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the guiding impulse of the show that's kind of makes it so smart in some ways, where there's a version of this where it is basically just like I Claudius, where, I mean, this show in many ways is the spiritual successor to I Claudius. We'll talk about later, but the very last scene of this whole show is very much like a baton pass to I Claudius. It basically picks up, it ends exactly where I Claudius starts. But the thing that really separates this from a show like that is that while you do have the kind of commander's tent level, what's Julius Caesar, and Pompey and Mark Antony, and what do they argue about in the Senate House? But then also you have these two, the hoi polloi, right? You get the sort of plebeian side of things. And it gets really sort of I think it also does kind of a good job is like the way regular people kind of engage with these macro things happening. Like there's this scene that I actually really like where I think it's in episode 2 or 3 maybe, where Pullo and Varenus are two kind of probably our main characters, right? Our guides through this show.
Yeah.
Are at Octavian's house and they're talking with Adia, and Varenus is a very, true to his character, is a staunch, he's a hardline traditionalist, right? He's maybe a Catonian, right? He just like the Republic was founded like this, and there is no reason we should do anything different from the way our ancestors did, which is a very Roman mindset. And then Pullo is like, I don't give a shit, right? Yep. And like Caesar, if Caesar makes poor people's lives better, then like great. Which is also like, these are exactly the kinds of situations that lead to people like enabling tyrants or whatever. But but we were gonna say actually a little note on
Christy. So from your fellow Latin nerds, Varenus and Pullo are technically named.
Okay.
In is it the Gallic Wars?
Yeah, I think so.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because I feel like I remember having my students read this passage. They have like a little vignette of and then they're like not really heard from again. So they don't have these like bigger lives and stories, but they're just two named soldiers of Caesar's, and they have this like jumping over the wall, like saving each other from the enemy, but it's just this little vignette, and then they disappear and we don't hear from them again.
I mean, it's in Caesar's commentaries. It's, I don't know, I mean, a lot of ways you could interpret it, him throwing a bone to who is this intended for his audience back home in Rome, like what's going on. But
well, that was the other moment I kind of liked for this, when they come back after the Senate brawl happens, and Caesar asks Mark Antony, is like, do you have one of the men I can name as part of my like motivational speech to go march on Rome? It's like, oh yeah, Pullo. And like Pullo like hears his name, I'm like, oh damn, am I in trouble?
Yeah.
But you can see that like, Caesar very much was beloved by his own men and everything like that. So he would know how to call out individuals and recognize them.
This is a thing I actually wanted to ask you too about, in terms of kind of when we think about his dramatizations of history, and a distinction that I recently kind of came across that I kind of like is like the distinction between like historical accuracy and historical authenticity, where like accuracy being like, these things happen, these people are real, it happened in these orders, and authenticity being like, this is the right vibe, right? Or like it captures the thing about it. And I think like that Caesar speech is like, while historically not accurate, as far as we can tell, feels very historically authentic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Where this is how Caesar even could make a power play like he did, right? Because he has just spent years in Gaul with his soldiers, right? They have a bond, like he is beloved by he must have been beloved by his soldiers, otherwise they wouldn't have gone
the Rubicon.
Gone rogue basically with him, like helped him stage a coup, right? He must have had the popularity back at home. I mean, and the other thing that I kind of like is like the way this show kind of, I think fairly succinctly, without too much baggage and politicking and exposition, kind of sets up the like political stakes, where you have these elite aristocratic hardliners, right, who have the system of government that they want to adhere to and like don't want to acknowledge a tyrant, which on the one hand is sympathetic of like one person taking over the show, but like how out of touch they are with just everything that's happening and lived people, the sort of class divisions, the why Caesar would be so popular among just regular Romans, the kind of the way everybody, or like most people, don't even really care. They just kind of want to back the right horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of following that line. I love that you don't really feel like you're on someone's side throughout this. It's like there are characters that you really like from both camps, I guess. And even like when Varenus and Pullo are kind of pulled apart into sort of like, oh, where do we actually have to fight? Like, who are we actually fighting for? It's like you're on no one's side. And I think that's a really clever and like well-written story of there are like very clearly delineated like battle lines drawn, but I'm rooting for everybody.
Yeah. The other thing about that speech in particular, where he calls out Pulo, I think what's really interesting of showing Caesar as a populist is like the Senate has declared him a criminal, right? But in that speech, he tells his soldiers, they consider all of us criminals. I am one of you and you are one of me. So like what happens to me happens to all of us. And I'm like,
in a post 2016 world, that kind of
it
speech
hits hard.
hits very different, right?
Yeah. So, and like that's always how I think about Caesar, is like he was a populist, and so that rhetoric, Julius Caesar is not one of them in many respects.
No, he's
really
his
not.
blood is as blue as it gets, right?
Yeah.
He is old money, old family all the way. But yet, yeah, he throws his lot in with the generally the populaces, and he did enact laws, and that the show kind of gets in like labor laws about sort of land distribution and like trying to get land and ownership back into the hands of Roman citizens and lower class citizens, so they wouldn't all be gobbled up by the sort of 1%, and they're getting cut out by like their. We're getting into the whole like Marxist reading of Roman history, but
I know, which is so awesome, and it's totally my shit, and I love that.
Well, and like that wasn't an original play by him. Like that is generally what the tyrants were trying to do. Like there was many people recognizing as like, you know what? Yeah, I have this noble title and name and family history, but if I want to maintain power, I need to go to the masses and make them happy.
Yeah.
Christy, you raised the question that is like, the fact that this show came out in 2005 and the way Julius Caesar there, where the idea of like a populist demagogue, at least in the United States, although this is a kind of triangulated British American, like American studio heads, British cast, Italian crew. But like the idea of that, like I wonder like if the show was made, say in 2018 or 2020, right, how our attitudes to a guy like Caesar would have been very different.
With a Boris Johnson and
in the post-Trumps and Boris Johnsons, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I mean, the main difference, how do I put this? The main difference is, I would argue, and I don't think I'm out of line here where I'm saying that Caesar was smart in a way that those guys kind of aren't.
Well, it's only hubris if you lose.
Yeah. Yep.
Ooh, words for the ages. So we get the like Caesar's march on Rome, Pompey basically in the Senate being caught with their pants around their ankles, kind of having to eat shit basically and run away and look bad, and Caesar kind of kicking their ass. This does actually lead me to a question of that the show kind of answers, where I mean, and just the question of like in retrospect, when we look at sort of Caesar, he does kind of seem like this tactical genius where, or to what extent is Caesar a tactical genius, and to what extent was he just really lucky in the right ways?
Yeah.
And well, I like that it kind of leans into both in the show, in that like Pompey probably makes some like very critical tactical errors that just kind of mean that, oh, Caesar kind of won this by default because we just left the city, I guess. But then also they have this whole contrivance with Civilia, and like, oh, is Caesar staying and like not pursuing Pompey because of this like love of his life relationship that he's in, which is kind of fun, right? It's I mean, not historically attested, but it's fun and like weird.
Or the whole the gold being like Pompey tries to take all the
that.
treasury out of Rome, that just sort of serendipitously falls into
one of
Polo's
my favorite
hands.
scenes is when, who is it Pompey's son, is it Quintus, comes in and is like trying to shake down Varenus, like, where's the gold? He's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And Polo
pulls up.
I mean, Polo, who is simultaneously the luckiest and unluckiest person just in the universe.
Like in the equivalent of like, I don't know, a Cadillac or something, right? Just
I mean, at some point, somebody who says it, Caesar, he says to Polo, it's like, you're clearly a liar and an idiot and a thief, but fortune seems to be on your side right now. So like,
and I don't fuck with that.
Yeah.
I'll fuck with that.
Yeah, I like that combination of like serendipitous events, but also like one of my favorite moments is really early on when Brutus comes to visit him. And, Brutus just kind of casually asks, like, how are things going? And you see Caesar pause for a moment and be like, it's not good.
Yeah, and then, the best bit, he has like a great look for the ages where Brutus is like, really, not good. That's not what I seen. And then Caesar's eyes just dart up for just a second, just to be like, Brutus is going to go back and say that things are bad, right? Which is, Caesar he's truly baiting it, or like he wants the Senate to declare him now. He wants the Senate to sort of force his hand in a way, because like the other true, incredibly Roman thing is you can never really just outwardly attack or invade or declare something. Everything has to be reactionary. The sort of joke is every war Rome ever fought was in defense. And Caesar does this in Gaul, where basically like his whole war in Gaul, which as they mentioned is illegal, he justifies it through all these ways of like, well, these people invaded our allies, so we go there. And then these people helped these other people invade our allies, so now I have a pretense to go invade them. And then before you know it, where Rome started with just some provinces and allies in the south of France, by the end of his 8-year war, all of Gaul is now Rome, which also coincidentally happens to enrich Caesar and make him wildly popular back in home.
I think another one of those times where it's like you really see the politics playing out. I have 2 scenes in mind. And one is where he bribes the augur to...
Oh my God.
At the party, which is
about this scene too.
Oh my gosh, we can come. And the other one is when he's trying to find a loophole after Pompey accepts the truce. He's like, okay, well, how do we make it that he didn't? He's like, he refuses to meet me in person. It's like the technicality, like the tiny little backward step that you're trying to get is so Roman to me. And
that was also the most Trumpy sounding thing.
I mean, yeah, we can even talk about just the way like machismo plays into all of this, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's all just kind of dick swinging, right?
Totally.
Yes, but that makes me want to turn to a different character who I find terrifying and so well played in this is Octavian. Like, oh my gosh, that kid is terrifying. But in like a good way, like, I know where this is going.
Yeah. So Octavian, in the first season played by Max Perkis. Right, the idea even decision, because like it seems like very much setting up that Octavian as this like calculating, right? He's watching Caesar, he's learning from Caesar, both the good and the mistakes that he's not going to make that Caesar makes. But yeah, I mean, he's this. I mean, I don't know, where do we even start with Octavian?
He's kind of like a twerpy kid at the beginning, right? Like he just wants to read. He doesn't want to like do anything, and I kind of love
he's
that.
Kind of a little incel. Like, I don't know how to.
He is. He's like this mini psychopath that's like. But sometimes he says stuff and you're like, oh shit, maybe don't.
But you know who I think he's actually learning from is his mother, Attia.
Oh,
like, look
100%.
at what Attia pulls off.
Yeah.
She makes Caesar march after Pompey. She's like, these things just happen. I mean, those kinds of little dalliances. I mean.
And there's one element that kind of the thesis on Octavian in the show is his like, not to get Freudian, but the like psychosexual hangups about sex and his mother and everything going on.
Yeah.
He is so uncomfortable. He's like clearly so uncomfortable with the idea of sex in a way that his mom is not, or maybe it's because of his mother.
Sure.
Yeah.
And he's also this kind of strategizing, scheming, like he's almost like this asexual sort of being.
Which just makes a lot of sense when you think about some of the later laws that brings
actually.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I want to come back to this later when we get to I Claudius and we see Brian Blessed in that, because that's a very different Augustus, who's a much more like personable. Because one of the things that I think Suetonius kind of talks about is that Augustus was very affable, or he was a sociopath who did it well.
Who could put it on, who could have that mask. And that's always the vision that I think just historically that I have as, just someone reading history have sort of had of Augustus is like, oh, this person must have been really charismatic to pull the shit that he pulled.
Yeah.
But I like the version of him here where he's kind of like the puppet master pulling the strings, and he has a lot of charismatic people around him.
But he's also like, since we're, talking about how this is a prequel to Game of Thrones in some ways, it's like I have thoughts of Joffrey in my head, and Joffrey's just like awful, like cannot accomplish anything. When we see Octavian, Varanus, and Pulo find him, and he's like, cut me free. And Pulo says, say please. And he recognizes, like, all right, like, I'm not in a position of power at the moment. I need to accept this. And then later, but he like acknowledges they saved him. He's like, no, they're going to dine with us as equals. They saved my life. And then when Pulo's his tutor and Pulo asks him a very like, you know, serious question, like he gives him a thoughtful response and then helps
And
him
helps him murder
a dude, torture and murder a dude, naturally.
I have two thoughts kind of at this point, which is one, I was talking to my students the other day about the idea of like teleological readings of things, like because we already know the end, does that influence the way we view the beginning, right? And I feel like there's that happening because we know that Augustus basically does come out on top. He's eventually going to kind of mastermind. Everything is going to fall into place for him. And again, there's the kind of open question is like, does it seem like he had it all figured out because it all ended up working out? Or was he sort of less in control? And so this show kind of wants to make it seem like he is very much like he has the puppet mastery thing that we talked about. But then just actually to Christy's point that she was just saying of like a thing that Augustus is unarguably very good at is surrounding himself with people that are going to do the thing. Like that's really also what he's good at, where we're going to see later, like he is going to have the right people in his stable, right? Or in his inner circle that are going to make it happen. He's going to cultivate the kind of brain trust.
Yeah. Yes.
And he understands like that is what he understands, that it's about like cultivating these kinds of allegiances and loyalties with the right people that are going to make it happen.
That's getting to like way more season 2 though.
Yeah. I really like what they've done with him so far. And I was impressed. And I guess can we go to Atia? She is my
we haven't talked about Atia at all, but she kind of is
which is a crime. Yeah. How have we not talked about Atia?
So actually, Christy, I really want to know your impression of Atia, just right out of the gate.
I just love her on so many levels. Like, first of all, like she seems superfluous in a lot of ways. Like, you know, she's like, I'm just doing the best for my daughter. And she seems petty in a lot of ways. But at the same time, like one of my favorite moments is when she's just crying one day and she's like, I'm all alone. And like she, you know, she's a rich and wealthy woman, but she doesn't have a husband. She's losing the support of almost the paterfamilias of her family, which is Julius Caesar. And there's about a civil war to break out. So how she's managing that, and the fact that she's using her sexuality to do that as well, but she still ends up feeling so alone. I kind of really love it because that is the only way, and we see it with Servilia too, but Servilia was like, you know, hooking up with Caesar out of love, but it's this thing of we can only really wield power through the relationship to the men in our lives. And if the men turn on us, there's no other recourse really. And so I think that's why I like her character so much, is she's trying so hard actually on behalf of herself and her family that it feels very realistic in a lot of ways to what the world must have been like for women back then.
Yeah, she's using like all the tools that she has.
Yeah.
Also, I really love Servilia writing those curse tablets.
Yes. I viscerally felt that. She's just like, I will say my other favorite scene with Atia and Octavian is after she sends him to Gaul and he comes back. She's like, how was it? No, it was awful, I'm sure. Let's never speak of it again.
Yeah.
Just like, all right.
I have such kind of conflicting feelings about Atia, where I wonder, like, I fear on one hand, is she playing into like the Livia tropes of the scheming mother, the conniving. She's not a poisoner like Livia, like we're going to see with Livia, but she's kind of the power behind the throne idea. And I am like, is this a feminist take? Is it an anti-feminist take? Is it neither? Is it both? And then my memory of when the show was sort of debuting, and then when I watched it the first time, was she's the one that popped the most, as she just kind of has the most colorful character. I mean, there's also, she's the kind of vector for the show to be like, this isn't your dad's Roman show, there are boobs and people and she's very much even just the scandalousness of like the scene where she's like tells Octavian to come in while she's bathing and she's having sex in front of her children, and like her kind of shamelessness, I guess, for lack of a better word, unapologetic.
Yeah, because she's always using sex, whether it's with Timon, the horse, or I don't know,
the horse trader guy.
Horse trader guy. Or it's Mark Antony. It's for her, it's always an exchange of something. She is getting something out of those liaisons.
Yeah.
And the basically kind of the access of like her sort of just charm versus the kind of, she does some like really like real messed up stuff, right? Where she
very much so.
like,
Yeah,
to
she
her
kills
children.
Yeah, kills her daughter's husband.
Yeah, murders.
Ex-husband. They were divorced.
Right. Yeah,
because she forced them to. Like
basically, I mean, prostitutes her daughter to Pompey to curry political favor, then kills her daughter's first husband to sort of try to close off that loop. The part where she is with Antony in bed, and then she's like, well, what if you abandoned Caesar and left him hanging out to dry, which is ultimately kind of what motivates Antony to like be like, I need to go to Caesar. And the way she kind of is like probably traumatizing her children and eventually turns her daughter against her. And probably Octavian has a real messed up relationship with his mother, which might explain stuff later. Who's to say?
Yeah. I think your question of, is she a feminist icon or something? I think that's really difficult to speak, because like feminism today is speaking to a period of time where women have enough power to, try and move things in an anti-sexist way, versus this is the patriarchy at the time.
Yeah.
And the power that women have is what is wielded through the men in their families. And I think that's why I like that, is like they're very cognizant of that reality, and they are looking at how women would use that to their advantage. And they'll lose out in the end, right? Because Mark Antony doesn't like that Attia kind of sees him for who he is. And the result is she pushed too far, so he hits her and leaves her. And now she doesn't have any real options at the moment.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's, we think so badly of Attia for like doing what she did to her daughter, but I thought it was really interesting that Niobe, they're like, oh, they're so excited for her daughter to marry the drover's son. But the minute her husband becomes higher class, they're like, oh, you can't marry him now. Like now we are higher class.
Right.
Yeah.
And like the daughter's like, but I love him. So like the same exact thing happened, but it was happening with a woman who had less power in some ways.
Right.
That's me.
No, I mean,
I'm just like, I'm thinking through like, and I'm sort of just, I can't help but like go forward in my brain in the story. Eventually Octavian becomes Augustus and like is that force that she could get behind. And she has such a hard time because of her divided loyalties originally. And then she's up against, Octavian's new wife. And so, there's so many more challenges ahead of her even now. But I do think she's still, once again, like using the tools that she has, which like, I don't know, annoyingly enough, happened to be sex, I guess.
She uses it very effectively.
Yeah, it seems to work.
Yeah. I mean, she gets, pillow talk. She gets the intel from Mark Antony.
That's how she gets like the Caesar and Sevilla talk from Antony. Yeah. And I do love when, I think, Christy, you sent us this clip where she's like, when they might all be murdered by a gang trying to invade their home, she's like, okay, well, you need to kill me first, and then, or like, I'm gonna kill Octavia, and Octavia's like, I don't want her to kill me.
that is one of the like, there's, I mean, even just a sense of like, though the show kind of feels very Roman in many ways, that scene to me feels like so British in a way that's like, well, of course, like, well, you kill you, and like, let's not make a fuss about it, and like how do we kill each other in a way that just makes the most sense, and like, let's not make a big deal out of it.
Well, and I liked that scene too, because to me that one had the strongest parallel to Game of Thrones that I remembered, of like Cersei getting super drunk and just yelling at how everyone's going to be raped and die.
Well, to your point, Christy, like Attia's maybe power or her father's, like, she has a very clear-eyed view of the way things are, and is like no pretense about it, right? Like, this is how it is, so like, I'm just gonna act in this way that makes the most sense. I'm just gonna like, and also like the idea of like, I'm going to get what's mine, right? I'm going to like use every tool that I can to like secure as much security. And even looking ahead, you mentioned Cersei, like Atia. I mean, we could draw this whole line of, I keep talking about Claudius, but I think it's hard not to talk about Claudius when you talk about the show, where the character of Livia connected to Atia, connected to the Cersei Lannisters of the world, of like the women in these kind of marginal axes of power that sort of resort to sex and violence and murder and extortion to secure power or safety or security for them and their children.
Yeah. And just as we've been talking about, like, the way that Atia functions, it really mirrors so much of what Octavian later does. He's like this logical, I'm going to use the tools that I have and I'm going to get what's mine. Like that, it works really well. And I feel like they did a really good job. This was really well written.
I'm also reminding to your part of like, Christy, you made like, well, like she gets it, like we live in the patriarchy, so it's like Octavian, you have to be a manly man to like succeed in this world. Like you gotta.
But also, if you seduce Caesar, that's great too. You are very pretty.
Well, yeah, they had no problem with that. That's fine.
No. Yeah. Oh, she's like, and she assumes that like you've seduced Caesar, and he's like, no.
No, that's not what happened.
I can't even imagine, like, if growing up as a teenager, if your mother like hired a tutor to be like, learn how to fight and also make sure that they are having sex, how kind of mortifying that would be.
Have a goat testicle.
Yeah, eat this testicle.
You're not manly, talking about being like shamed by your mother, right? Where it's like,
yeah. But I think that's what I again really liked about Octavian and Atia's relationship. It's very complicated, but I like that it seems to indicate that Octavian has learned a lot from his mother and observing how she survived. Yeah. And like, we always think that like, oh, these great men learn from other men. And yeah, he's reading Greek philosophers and things like that. But street knowledge, street cred, he's getting that from his mom. Mm-hmm. For sure.
How to actually function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she says something like, Julii are never in want of enemies or something like that. Like she knows what it takes.
So, and actually kind of segueing it, we talked a little bit about Pullo and Varenus, but we could sort of switch over like from the patrician side of things to the plebeian, right? And like, I mean, even how we feel like, I think we probably, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Titus Pullo maybe has our hearts.
Oh, gosh,
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. Varenus is annoying. I think Niobe says it best. You're an idiot. And I'm like, yes, Niobe. Yes, he is.
I mean, yeah. Varenus, where to begin?
I mean,
I liked him on Grey's Anatomy. Like, I don't know.
Well, but that's just it, right? He is the quintessential Roman through and through, and we hates it.
Yeah. I mean, he's, in a nutshell, the most repressed individual ever.
Yes.
Like, he is toxic masculinity. I don't know what to say.
And the only time we like him is the straight man to Titus Pullo. Like, that's the only time we like him.
But I feel like starting from this point gives him somewhere to grow, right? Like, he has somewhere to go, and I'm, like, interested in seeing what happens. Mostly because I'm like, why are you being such a dick about this? Because he's such an asshole, and he can't get the stick out of his ass. But, like, it's like I'm still rooting for him somehow. Like, I'm like, please stop being such an asshole.
What's the joke where he's asking Pullo for like basically like relationship and sex advice, and Pullo basically like tells him about the glitter.
How do you know this of my woman?
It's like, all women have.
If Varenus lived now, Varenus would be like a Ben Shapiro stan or something like that.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Pullo matched up with anyone is just wonderful. Like his friendship with Octavian is also like giving me life right now. I don't know. I've never actually tortured anyone before. Cut off his thumbs.
And I was worried about bringing you.
Testament also to just like the late great Ray Stevenson, who just talked about like this was the show that really helped him like kind of grow into an actor, right? But like, man, Pullo is a fun role.
Mm-hmm. Such a great character, yeah.
A guy who is, he has his fingers on the pulse of life. He's just kind of riding the waves.
Like brain damaged in what, episode 2 or something?
I did want to talk about that scene because that scene was amazing from like an ancient medicine perspective of, I wish I had known about this when I was teaching the history of medicine, because I have a conversation with my students. It's like, doctors, it's a service that you perform. And like, you know, the best advertisement is like, hey, watch me drill into some guy's head. And oh, look, he's not screaming in pain. You should hire me for your next brain trauma.
I'm reminded of this Master and Commander scene where he performs brain surgery basically in front of the entire ship. And
Yeah.
I mean, also that also feels very, again, like authentic of like that actually is the kind of surgery that people could perform. And I was talking just today, I had a lecture in my mythology class about Apollo, and I was talking about healing cults and Epidaurus and how it's like this combination of like there's very clinical procedures of like recording all of the symptoms and the afflictions and the results, and like sort of like this like objective observation based documentation of medicine combined with this mysticism element that like to us seems very oil and watery, but like kind of could coexist in antiquity.
I think this was Christie's dissertation.
Yeah,
Right.
it was based. Well, but that's the thing too. It's like you go to the doctor and like you'll still get like ask for prayers, or you know, thoughts and prayers is still a very common thing. We mix with medicine.
Yeah, I mean and then the doctor in that scene performs like a very technical surgery, and then at the end who does he say to pray to?
Oh, he's like sacrifice a hare, right? It's like a rabbit.
Sacrifice a hare. Yep. Like I loved that. It was like the pus will drain. At first it'll look like this. It'll look like this. I'll send my boy to change the dressings.
Yep.
And then it's like, and then sacrifice a hare to this one. And it's like, that's it. That is medical pluralism of the ancient world, is like this, and this, but also, you know, throw one to the gods just in case. You never know.
Yeah.
And the way I think he says like that usually works.
Yeah.
Which is again kind of testimony where it's like, you know, I've got a wealth of experience to draw upon, like, which is how the sort of medical practice happens, right? It's just like observation, repetition, observation, drip, 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 drip.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved that's why he had a young male assistant too, because that is exactly how medicine was taught, was like you take on a mentee and they shadow you, and that's how you learn all these procedures.
This is very tangential. And we can like go back if we're not done.
Go back to what? We're adrift.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
right.
I'm glad we talked about that scene because I loved it. Go, Lash,
like,
go.
This is sort of just in the sort of like random sacrifices. I really love the depiction of religion in this show, and like the very multicultural, colorful, crazy, weird, insane parts of Roman religion that are just kind of randomly peppered in. And like there are big scenes like when Adia goes and she does the big sacrifice where the bull's like blood just drips all over her. Like that's
Mithras?
crazy.
What was that?
I think they say Magna Mater.
They say Magna Mater.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's the guys dancing, which is a thing for that cult where it's like the dancing priests and the bull and so it's probably Sibylle or Magna Mater, but
like there's like those big institutions, and then like the augurs with their birds, and like that's a big institutionalized religion. But then just like the little tiny weird things that are like some weird shrine on the street, or like Varenus's daughter like exchanging the grapes at like some shrine,
and they had Janus, like, right?
Well, they had their little Janus statue like for their party, and you know that it was knocked over, and it's like that is so fun, and just like bits and pieces of just like this little everyday weirdness that you don't necessarily, you can't like line up with, I don't know, standard Roman mythology, but it's like this is like religion in practice. It's like
Roman religion is such a thorny kind of issue because they were a very religious people, but like pinning down exactly what that meant gets really like it's like sand, right? It's like the harder you try to grab it, like the more kind of slips out, and it's just very, because it also just kind of cuts against what we think of as like religion and religiosity.
I also loved Mark Antony just being like, is it over?
I mean, truly, right? I don't know if any of you have ever like sit through like communion or something like that, but just being like, Jesus.
Fucking hell, are we still doing this?
Yeah, I loved that you had those very, you know, state-sponsored, like, kind of like when you go to Rome and you go see the Pantheon or something, like that's kind of what you're envisioning, but like those smaller shrines that like have animal skulls and something like, and it's dirtier in some ways.
Yeah, like, it's messy and it's
weird.
Lived in.
I have a whole working thesis that I need to work into a working article about Ovid's Fasti and how it's all just like, this is our religion, and like, why do we do this? I don't know. The priests don't even know. None of this makes any sense. It's all arbitrary.
Yeah, Pullo's my favorite for this. So like the very beginning when he's like locked up and is like, he's bargaining, right? It's like, so White Lamb, if I can't find that, I'll get you some birds.
Yeah, if I can't find that, just like a really nice pigeon or something.
Yeah, some really nice pigeon. And then at the very end, like I think we stopped at the end of episode 6 was like a great place to stop because again, it's just Varanus and Pullo talking. And Pullo's like, Neptune fucking sucks if you can't keep me dry.
Right. I mean, Varanus is the stringent rule follower and it does him no good, which is why he's a deeply unhappy, repressed man who makes everyone around him miserable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And well, I mean, then Pullo is the foil, right? Like we can't have one without the other. They are these two different sides of this coin. And I forget what he's talking about, but Varanus says something about some like semi-historical mythological Roman figure, and Pullo's like, who? Like,
what
are you talking
Cincinnati
about?
or no,
it was Cincinnatus, the Gracchi, and someone else.
Pullo's like, what the are you talking about? Like, I don't care about that.
Maybe Marius, something like that. Yeah. He's like, and then, I think it's the Gracchi. He's like Pullo's like,
he mentions the Gracchi. Yeah. Which that he knows his history. Good for Varanus.
The Gracchi for them would be like, it's about 100 years difference, maybe, or something like that, right? So it would be like, Depression era people for us, right? Or it'd be like a 20s,
like a Roosevelt-esque figure.
Yeah, somebody in like the turn of the century, like.
Yeah, it's interesting because like a few people when the fights, breaking out between Pompey and Caesar, and they're like, I remember the days of Sulla, blood everywhere, and like you could definitely be just like, well, I remember not so long ago. And so it's so weird to like these names all come in a certain order for us, and it's all just a very long time ago, but again to like live and it's like recall some historical names, and like I hear people talk about politicians from the 80s. I'm like, who is that?
Exactly.
Gary Hart.
What?
Forget the Roman Empire. I think about Gary
made me
Hart
go who
way too much. He got caught with his mistress aboard a boat a photo of him with his mistress aboard a boat called Monkey Business. And he was the top Democratic contender.
Such simple times.
Right. Having a mistress was enough to like ruin your campaign.
On a boat.
Yeah, imagine.
We haven't really talked about Mark Antony. I don't know if we necessarily have
James Purfoy. I don't know, 10 out of 10, no notes. I think he's the other, for me, he's the other breakaway. Because that's
I would agree.
In the way that Adia is a really like chewy character. I mean, Pullo's pretty chewy. Adia is super chewy of like, we can just kind of munch on scenery everywhere. It was really weird to see like Adia would go around and like take a bite out of a column, but chewing on the scenery. I think Mark Antony is also, I mean, just he has that, I wrote in my notes somewhere that Mark Antony has huge BDE energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then full frontal.
He does.
Yeah. What is that? Is that a prosthetic? I need to know. I don't know. I do appreciate at least that if we're going to have a bunch of naked women, thank goodness we have at least one naked man.
Yeah, he's like, I'll take one for the team. Behold.
Yeah. Eli's campaign, show us the dicks.
Exactly. I stand behind this every time.
There is a insane penis at one point.
Oh yeah. Well, it's the like present, right? That Addie is going to give to Sevilla. It's just like it's a big dick. That's like, why wouldn't she want this?
Honestly, I questioned that less than I questioned the giant gold jewel encrusted tortoise on the pillow. Yeah. I'm like, what is that? Atia, you have me at guy with giant cock, but like the turtle?
Yeah, turtle? But no, Mark Antony, I think, is also just like a very colorful portrayal of like a name in a history book.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he really runs with it and it works really well. He's just kind of this like almost gross, kind of creepy, but like very capable, charismatic guy. But he doesn't really want all this responsibility. Like it sort of toward the end of the episodes we watched, he's like in Rome, in charge. And he's like, what do you mean I have to stay behind? He like wants to be the man of action and to do all the things. And I think it's a great narrative structure to like have him go against that nature. And it works really well in a story.
Mark Antony is one of the characters that kind of comes with I mean, in some ways, it's almost an unenviable role because, like, it comes with baggage where, like, there's Shakespeare. And Julius Caesar, I think similarly, you have Shakespeare representations. You have Cleopatra, right? Richard Burton. Whereas Titus and Pullo are relatively blank slates. Adia, too, for the most part, although Adia is kind of informed by Livia and other characters. But Mark Antony, like, when you are portraying Mark Antony, like, you are entering into a sort of larger network of Mark Antony's, right? There's an inevitable intertext that's going to happen of, like, thinking about the Richard Burtons of the world, other, you know, stage portrayals of the character. Like when you're an actor, and I think especially like a British actor with training, to play Mark Antony kind of means something. But I think, like, to the efficacy that Eli, you mentioned, of, like, Julius Caesar sums it up in, like, one of the first, I think the first episode, where he's like, he's good at he likes killing people or something like that.
Or yeah, he's good at, I feel like he's good at killing people. And, like, that's very true. Like, he's, you know, part of the, Caesar tells him, like, don't wash the blood off when they, like, want to, you know, call attention to what's happened. And he's very much that man of action.
And he's bored, and when he's stuck in Rome, he's like bored and listless. And
that Senate scene is my absolute. It's like the motion. He's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do that. I sat through that damn long ritual so I could do that.
I mean, and then later you get the scenes of, like, the Senate, you know, in the sort of Julian regime, where it's him, and he's basically, like, mouthing the words to the senator to say.
Or it just in, like, it's either the first or the second episode, he, like, asks Caesar for money, a talent, and then he, like, turns around and is like, here's half a talent to go do this thing. And he's just obviously pocketing, like, half of that money. I just feel like that sums up just his kind of character in one go.
Yeah, he was fun. I was surprised how much I enjoyed him, actually.
I mean, yeah, a lot of chewy characters, right? To really, like, they're not good people, but they're fun people.
No. Yeah, no one's good.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the nudity more broadly, or?
I don't really have much to say other than just in the arc of, like, prestige television, I feel like, and this is most obvious, I think, in the first episode. And this is generally, I think, like, for TV shows where the first episode is like, there's boobs and people are having sex and, like, full frontal, and then it kind of, you know, I mean, early Game of Thrones, I think, is very guilty of this, where it's, like, gratuitous sex scenes and torture and all this other stuff, right?
I will say I wanted to give the show props because I thought one of the coolest, like, I knew that the Niobe's grandson or whatever was probably her real son, but I really liked how they did the reveal of she has to nurse him. And, like, the boob is shown again, but it's not sexualized at that point. It is used as a plot twist reveal if you couldn't see it coming. And I'm like, do you know how many shows, like, will just show boobs on boobs on boobs for, like, the sex factor, but not for an actual functional purpose? And so I was like, good job, Rome. I'm impressed.
Yeah, no, that's true. I never thought of it that way. Yeah. I will say I feel like it kind of works with just if you're doing a show about Rome, there is this sort of, like, Roman opulence and extravagance and luxury that I feel like the sex doesn't feel particularly out of place. It seems to work every time that they include it in ways that I feel like Game of Thrones did not have it fully ingratiate or, like, integrated into the story, like, actually being nudity being, you know, plot reveals or anything like that. And so I guess it never like struck me as weird.
When does it service the plot or further the character or make some sort of sense versus is it just
sex
this is
for sex?
Sex or nudity or violence or whatever, like, for X, you know, X for X's sake. And I mean, this is Game of Thrones kind of got some, I think, pushback on this. And then
I was going to say, I think going from that, what I am really surprised about the show and what I really appreciate is the way that the women are depicted in the show. Like, I'm actually really impressed because, again, like, these women can be powerless in certain instances. So we see both Servilia and Atia get beaten by their lovers. And they can't physically retaliate, Servilia's got a plan, other than the curse tablets, where she's very much getting out some aggression.
Eli and I are making the like Chucky hand motion.
Psycho, psycho stabby.
But like her son's Brutus, right? We know where this is going eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've got that. And then Attia, like I loved that scene where like her slave pulls out a knife and Attia tells him to get out of my house.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's what I appreciate is like, versus there are like a few instances where there's just a nameless woman and she literally gets effed by Mark Antony, who's a poor goat herd lady. And like, it's like, I hate that, but she's not a named character. It's meant to really show something about Mark Antony more than anything. And most of the women that are named and portrayed in the show are given agency that is believable for the time that they would have been living. So I do really appreciate that.
Think about Octavia just like reciting some really sad Virgil at the dinner party.
Which also, I had a moment. I'm glad you caught that because I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, no, it's the Aeneid, and it's like, well, this won't be written for couple decades, but all right. That's fine.
I was like, is there an anachronistic poetry pull going on here?
Yes, there is.
Maybe Virgil was inspired by that line. Maybe that's what the entire Aeneid was based off of. Who knows?
She's like, yeah, I'll recite some poetry for you, like, assholes. Here's this really sad thing about crawling out of hell. Like, good for you, Octavia.
Well, and she stands up for her brother a lot of times, right? Like when her mom is pushing too much.
How far have you seen, Christy?
Just episode 6. I'm trying to stay true.
All right, never mind. I'm not going to say anything.
Nope.
I did happen to see a clip where things apparently get weird, so
okay.
But we'll see.
I mean, it all gets weird, but that's fine.
That's fair. Yeah, I have one other thing that I think would be interesting to discuss. It was Pompey on the beach when he gets the notice from Caesar's like, yeah, I'm still coming after you. And he looks at the slave who delivered the message like, so simple to be a slave. And I guess I wanted to talk about that because the two slaves we see the most, I think, what are their names? I wrote them down. Posca.
Yep. Posca, played by Nicholas Woodson, is Posca. He's Julius Caesar's basically secretary.
Right-hand secretary, yeah.
And Castor, which is the slave for Attia, the male slave.
Yeah,
and
I love their conversations are really, really good.
I will not. What's the bit with Mark Antony? Like ask about it. I will ask about Mark Antony. No, don't tell him it wasn't me. I will not tell him it's you. Like, no, don't ask. I will not ask Mark Antony.
Attia is like, but then you must kill yourself for it would not be proper for you. He's like, I would never. Domina. Yeah, so I kind of that obviously from us watching what Pompey is saying is utterly ridiculous. I'm like, oh, so lucky to be a slave. You don't have to make these hard decisions. But I really liked the depictions of, I think that's where I'm struggling a little bit too. It's of the male slaves where they get to show their intelligence, their rapport with their domina and dominus. I do like that we, at the beginning, when Julia passes away, one of the things she asked Pompey to do is to take care of her slaves, which I thought was really interesting. So I guess that was my question. What did you guys think about the depiction of the slaves in the show?
I really love Posca as a character just because it seems like he has so much personality and agency, and he has this relationship with Caesar that is kind of crucial. If Posca wasn't around, shit wouldn't get done.
And I think part of this is kind of speaks to Julius's character, that he would have a slave that he kind of recognizes. Posca clearly has ideas and opinions and thoughts about everything, and they are well informed. And Julius, I'm saying Julius like we're on a first name basis. My man JC, when he has his little meeting of the minds, it's him, Mark Antony, and Posca. Yeah. And Posca weighs in. And Posca is almost kind of a counterpoint to Mark Antony versus exactly to your point, Chris, you were Pompey and Cato and those guys, those kind of real dyed-in-the-wool aristocrats, kind of true blue, old-style Romans, wouldn't even, there was no enslaved person talking to Pompey.
Like that. No, not at all. No.
In the way that Caesar is open. And somebody says, I think at one point, that it's Posca, he takes such liberties, or that Caesar would even entertain that. And I think that's also part of the reason of where Caesar is sort of more plugged into regular people in a way that, like, the main problem for all of their like grandstanding and high valued, ideas about the Republic and Rome's history and things like that is that just like the Catos of the world and the Pompeys of the world are just so wildly out of touch with like regular human life.
Yeah.
But I do think like that's very, I don't know. I don't want to say one dimensional because Pascha is like feels like a very real character, but that's like one perspective on ancient slavery. And I think we do have other perspectives. Like Varenus brings back a bunch of Gallic, just like people
who just die.
Who just die of plague while he's waiting to sell them. And like that's a much more like realistic, I feel like, and dirty, awful vision.
Yeah. Well, the one boy who survives, I actually really like the scene where he's hiding in like a basket or something, and it's like it's being filmed in a way like you're being stalked or something, and then it just becomes a game of tag between the youngest girl of the household and him, and you forget like in some ways these slaves do grow up as part of the family.
And I mean, just for like little details or something, that like all the enslaved characters have those little tags around their necks that say like Pascha, and then under it, it's like
property of.
Basically it says like it has like the initials. It's like CIC, right? Where it's like Gaius Julius Caesar, and all that, which is a thing, right? Some of them have. I mean, the one in the very first episode
versus Pompey's man has it tattooed onto his head. Yeah. I think one of my favorite moments of like is when Pascha and Castor meet up. It's like, here is the guest list for tonight's dinner.
And she's like, take a seat.
Request no shellfish.
No shellfish. She's like, is he planning to murder these people here?
I don't think so.
That does not like surprises. I'm like, that feels very like, it's just like, here's what our masters are gonna, got planned. Hope it doesn't go awry.
What Eli was talking about just a second ago of like the different realities of slavery in antiquity, where you have chattel slave, prisoners of war, people born in who are just sort of working hardly, like miserable, cruel, hard existences. But you also have castes of slaves who are educated, very often Greek or Greek speaking, that would serve as like secretaries and scribes and like tutors and teachers essentially.
Yeah. And they had a lot of power. Like they're doing a lot of stuff and they are controlling a lot of information.
And became like extensions of these families sort of in ways that there are these sort of different realities. Now, Pascha's great. I like everything he's about. Other sort of, I'm looking through the cast list of other performances we're not talked about. We talked about Varenus and Pullo. We talked about Attia, Pompey a little bit, Servilia, Octavian, Niobe, Octavian.
Calpurnia, Caesar's actual wife.
I mean, I like that she's like
an afterthought.
Yeah, that she's an afterthought.
And everyone knows it.
Like, I see that you're trying to be like lighthearted and humorous, but I won't join you. Like whatever she says at the party, it's like, stop trying to involve me in your bullshit. And that just feels very, okay, we're just going to try to step away and get rid of this lady.
I also like that everyone knows, and like Caesar knows this and Calpurnia knows this. It's like, this marriage is just for show. I will be the perfect wife. And you get to use my family's name for stuff. So the minute like you start to drag my name through the mud, I leave you and I give 0 Fs about it.
Hell yeah.
We talked about these a little bit, but favorite scene?
Oh, definitely the negotiation between Attia with her household. It was like, who shall kill you? Servilia, my people are very good.
Yeah, it would not be proper. Like, it would only be proper if like so-and-so like, mom, please don't kill me. I'll kill myself. Like,
no, let my mom have the pleasure. Dude, yeah, it was just so great on so many levels.
That it's more just like bickering with your children.
Yeah. I really love Caesar and Mark Antony bribing the augur, the main priest. And he's like, I hear your wife has, like, I missed her birthday. Like, oh, how much of this bribe can I give you? And then Mark Antony on the other side is like, you wouldn't want to choke on any of those oysters. It's so delightful. And they're so good just all together in that scene. I just really love it.
I do kind of really like Posca and Castor sitting down being like, all right, no shellfish, no murders.
Yep.
Like, very cool. All right. Unless either of you have anything to add, we have 3 minutes left, so I got to do the outro.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Listeners, you can find us on most major streaming platforms as well as movieswedig.com. Please like, review, and subscribe. It really helps us out a lot just to sort of get attention and listens and play, basically, for lack of a better word. You can follow us also on Instagram and Threads at movies_we_dig. So Movies We Dig, just with underscores instead of spaces. And we are now on Blue Sky. So that issue got resolved. So you can follow us at movieswedig.bsky, so or bsky.social. If you enjoy the show and want us to show that enjoyment in a more quid pro quo way, you can support us on Ko-fi at /movieswedig. Thank you again for listening, and we'll be back next time when we excavate the back half of season 1 of HBO's Rome. Thank you again, and bye.
Bye.